Good afternoon, and it is my pleasure to introduce Secretary Padilla this morning. I wanted to thank Secretary Padilla for joining us. We were supposed to be in person today, and we are here. Not even a pandemic can stop you from being part of our conference. So thank you, Secretary. I want to say just a couple of words. Thank you for your leadership. Since entering office in 2015, you've been focused on modernizing elections, overseeing the historic general election in 2018, which had the highest turnout in 1982. And just this February, we hit another milestone, or California hit over 20.6 million registered voters. So thank you for your leadership, Secretary Padilla. You've been working hard, your team has as well, and I thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely, Astrid. Don't be stealing too much of my thunder now. I do want to offer some welcoming remarks, and then I think you have some questions prepared for me to do a little back and forth to kick off this virtual conference. So thank you again for inviting me to be part of the FOS conference again this year, even as we gather under difficult circumstances and these virtual settings. First and foremost, I hope that everybody participating today is staying safe and healthy, and the same goes for their family and their loved ones. While COVID-19 has impacted every Californian, believe it or not, the number of cases and certainly the number of fatalities in California is relatively low given our very large and very diverse population. And that's thanks to our collective action and compliance with stay-at-home orders and other public health directives. So let's continue to do our part and continue to stay safe. Now, with public health officials and other frontline workers confronting the immediate impacts of the pandemic, it is we, the community that loves and cares about our democracy, that is charged with determining how we prepare for the November election and make sure that we administer the election in a way that is accessible, secure, and safe for everyone involved, for voters, for poll workers, for election staff, and everybody in between. But before I get to the November elections, let me acknowledge, as you did a minute ago, Astrid, that we, first of all, thank all the elections workers in all parts of the state for their commitment, for their professionalism in this year's primary election, despite the circumstances that we were on the verge of. When I certified the election recently, I proudly reported that nearly 9.7 million California voters cast their ballot in the 2020 primary. That's a record high for California, and more than 1.1 million more ballots cast than just 4 years ago in the 2016 primary. The turnout of our voting or eligible voting age population in California was the second highest in nearly 40 years. And get this, because I know we're into the weeds on this stuff, 13 of the 15 Voters' Choice Act counties exceeded the statewide turnout rate. So all the policies that we've been working together to adopt, all the policies that we've been working together to implement, and all the policies that we've been working together to inform the public on are making significant progress. So thank you again to all the elections personnel who worked tirelessly and delivered once again election results with accuracy and integrity, even as the pandemic was impacting California in the heart of our canvass period. Now, as we prepare for the November election, we start with acknowledging what the public health experts are already telling us, that the impact of COVID-19 are going to be with us for the foreseeable future. There's a chance of a second wave in the fall, and even without one, very, very unlikely there will be a vaccine that's been tested and deployed. And so there will be some level of physical distancing and other public health directives in place come November. But fortunately, I think California is well positioned to meet this moment. We already have many online tools to assist voters, including online voter registration, including ballot tracking and registration verification tools. You know, Governor Newsom last week signed an executive order making California the first state in the nation to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic by taking action to send every registered voter a ballot in the mail for the general election. In March, 75% of voters statewide received their ballots by mail. So that's the good news. We're not starting from scratch. But in a state with more than 20 million voters, or I think we're getting close to 21 million pretty soon, getting to 100% will still require a big effort for many, many counties. So just as I have advocated for funding for cybersecurity, for the upgrading and replacement of voting systems, I'm committed to fighting for the resources necessary from the federal government and from the state government to support counties as they expand to vote by mail printing, mailing, processing, etc. And while voting by mail is the safest and probably the most convenient way to vote during a health pandemic, let me be clear that I am not calling for an all vote by mail only election. I'm committed to maintaining as many in-person, safe, but in-person voting opportunities both on and before Election Day for voters who need assistance, voters who need to participate in same-day registration, etc. Now, I'm also excited to announce that the Secretary of State's office has retained some expert election consultants to assist counties in expanding vote-by-mail operations and other preparations for November. Amber McReynolds, Jennifer Morell, and Noah Prates are respected nationally for their leadership as election administrators. They've assisted numerous other states in improving elections, and they've come on board with California, not just with my office, but all 58 counties as partners to assist. And so their operational expertise will be invaluable as we prepare for November. But all of that being said, we are still going to depend on the support and partnership and the help of the FOS community. For starters, we're going to need your help in educating over 20 million voters about the changes that are coming for the November election. We can afford a lot of opportunities, but their benefit will be limited if voters are not aware of them. So we're going to have to work together closely on that. Secondly, we'll also need to recruit thousands of new poll workers throughout the state and identify newer, safer, smarter voting locations. I want to take a moment to thank all of you that are participating today who have already engaged with us and offered your ideas and offered your resources. I know that working together, we will meet our obligation to providing an accessible, secure, and safe election come November. Our democracy and the people of California deserve nothing less. So thank you again, Astrid, and bring on the questions.
All right. Thank you, Secretary Padilla, for giving us that update. And I know everybody's been working really hard on a lot of this work. Sorry, I'm seeing the screen. Not sure why that is coming up. So I wanted to jump into the Q&A. And so, sorry, Secretary Padilla, technical challenges here as I'm navigating. And I want to jump into some of the questions that came in through the Q&A. You know, a lot of people talk about technology, and I know this is a very policy-specific conference, and you've answered this question in the past, but I think it's important to keep on acknowledging where we are with advancements, and people always question why California can't do online voting, and I want to just lead with that because I know it's a question that's top of mind for those that are not in the details of election administration.
Yeah, no, look, I think I get asked that question every single day and have been for years. And the bottom line is, right, if we go back to just a couple of months ago, before COVID-19 really consumed our thoughts and concerns, we talked about the integrity of our elections from a cyber threat standpoint, foreign interference standpoint. You know, those risks are still very much there. And the fact of the matter is that there's no technology that has been proven safe and secure from an election standpoint. The last thing that we need is to undermine either the elections itself or the perception that our elections are not secure. So until technology reaches a point where voting can be secure, we're not going to see it in California. Elections are very different than banking, than buying movie tickets, or ordering takeout. If somebody messes with the votes and the election results, our democracy pays a huge price. So Nothing's been proven completely safe yet, so we're going to be very measured. But that doesn't mean we can't embrace other technologies to make registration easier. You made reference to online registration. We have automatic registration or voting easier, whether it's vote by mail or giving voters the flexibility to go to any voting location in their county, convenient to them, through the Voters' Choice Act, which is growing in different parts of the state.
Mm-hmm. And we know that the executive order last week has now declared California the first state to say that they will send every voter a vote by mail ballot, but it's important to point out that that's not the only option for voting. Can you please talk to us a bit more about like what are the options? We know that the executive order has a deadline of May 30th. You've mentioned that your office has recruited some experts, national experts on this. So how close are we to understanding what the additional options for voting are going to look like?
Right. So I think there's a couple of things that sort of play together here. First, again, to reemphasize, the executive order from last week directs counties to send every registered voter a ballot in the mail by that E29 deadline, 29 days before the election. But it is not to be construed as a vote by mail only election. The executive order makes clear the commitment and the importance of maintaining as many in-person voting opportunities as possible, both on and before election day. So what we're waiting for is to finalize what the minimum requirements for each county should be. Not just how many locations, right? We have some benchmarks to work off of, traditional polling place counties and the ratio of how many polling places for how many voters, or under the BCA model, how many vote centers for how many voters, also for how many days. Are we looking at just an election day election? Is it 4 days of voting, 11 days of voting? What's the right balancing act? So I think in our heart of hearts, we want to maximize the number of locations and days, but we're dealt with a very practical reality. To the extent that we can maintain those in-person voting opportunities, we've got to find new, safer locations, right? Conducting elections in a residential garage or at a senior home does not make sense anymore. So as many voting locations that we've used in the past are no longer viable options, how do we replace them with smarter locations and with larger locations? I mean, just think a traditional polling place, 20 voting booths side by side, that's gone. Spacing out by 6 feet requires larger square footage, just to give one example. And even if we had a lot of locations, they're useless if we don't staff them up. And a lot of the poll workers that we've relied on in the past, seniors and retirees, are the ones that are most vulnerable during this health pandemic. And so the need to recruit a new generation of poll workers in less than a few months is a big task. So, we're leveraging our partnerships that we've established over the years to not just remind people to register to vote or remind people to vote, but to look at employees of private companies and local governments and others to volunteer for the November election. But we're going to need your help. As the weeks and the next couple of months come by, we'll get more granular information. Who needs our help more? Is it LA County? Is it San Diego? Is it Merced? Is it Tuolumne or Shasta? So it's all hands on deck time. Bring your Rolodexes to the table, your networks, your contact lists to the table. I'm aging myself here, but I know that working together will rise to the occasion.
Yeah. Yes, I think some of us still have Rolodexes. And then as we close out this segment, I know that we could definitely talk to you forever. There's a lot of questions that came in, but there is a lot to do. And I think what you're emphasizing there is that we're going to know how to prioritize as we get more information, as we get closer to the November election. But where can this network support you now in terms of the many items that were listed? Where can we support our election officials now?
Okay, so the executive order gave us a deadline of May 30th to finalize these in-person requirements. So I'll just alert everybody right now. It may come by way of urgency legislation, or if not, it may come by way of executive order. So as soon as we get clarity on that, we'll certainly be putting the information out. And look, you guys know my team, whether it's Jana Lane, head of our elections division, James Schwab, Chief Deputy Secretary of State, our communications team, Robert Negrete overseeing outreach, or others. We're working pretty tightly here. So anybody who wants to engage, we're setting up a task force to get your ideas, to get your suggestions, your potential leads on resources, so we can connect resources with the counties who need it the most. So stay tuned, and let's show the rest of the nation how it's done.
Great. Thank you, Secretary Padilla, for joining us today, Secretary Padilla. And thank you for your remarks. Thank you for your leadership. My best wishes to you, to your family, and to the SOS team.
Thank you. Stay safe, everybody.
Thank you. And now I will pass it over to our board member, Kathy Darling Allen, to continue.